Welcome to Let the Stories Live On by Discover Books, where we discover the stories behind the story through author interviews and book reviews and anything having to do with books. Don't forget to subscribe now and like our page.
Hi, welcome to Let the Stories Live On, the stories behind the stories, where we meet tonight with Don Pugnetti, the author of A Coat Dyed Black. And we are going to get not only the story of his book tonight, but a little bit more about his life, his story, and where this idea for the story came from. It's a historical fiction set in Norway during World War II. And I'm going to turn the time over. We're going to call Don Jerry because Don is his pen name. But Jerry, why don't you tell us a little bit about the setting of your book and kind of how you came to write it? And then we can kind of go and fill in some of the gaps with the timeline and things like that.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. And I should tell the viewers that Don Pugnetti Jr. is my real name, and but Jerry has been my nickname and the name I commonly use and except for official records. But I wrote the book under my real name as a tribute to my late parents. So because that's what they named me, but they also nicknamed me too. So anyway, but it's a very relevant question because this is how this book evolved. Really has a backstory to it, and I have to take you back to the mid 1970s when I was early in my newspaper career in Tacoma, Washington, at the News Tribune. And actually early in my marriage, Wendy and I were married in 1973. And so in early conversations with my father-in-law, who was a post-war Norwegian immigrant, and actually Wendy's second dad, her birth father died of cancer when she was young and her mom remarried. But in those conversations, he told me stories about his involvement in the resistance in Norway during World War II. And they were eye-opening for me. They were, some of them, riveting stories. But in addition, I knew really nothing about what happened in Norway during the war. But these stories were significant enough, I thought, that I was very curious to find out. And so this wasn't, to find out, you couldn't just go online and access the multitude of websites. This is the mid 1970s. And so I did what most people did. I walked into the public library, checked out books, and started to read. And the more I learned, the more significant I felt it was. And it didn't take me a long time to determine that this was a story that should be told. And so I began tape recording conversations and interviewing my father-in-law. And that led to more books read, other materials that I sought to access, several trips to Norway where I interviewed other members of the family who were involved in resistance activities, and as well as others outside the family, both in Norway and there were a couple here. Immigrants here that I interviewed. And so I was compiling research, and long about the mid 1980s, I sort of hit a wall, and I grew discouraged. There were several reasons for it, but one significant one was the people I talked to would talk to me on condition that they not be named. And I understood it. I respected that, and their their logic, their rationale was that what they did was no more significant than what so many others did. And a great many, gave their lives for the cause. So again, I understood that, but I had set out in my head. I envisioned writing a nonfiction book. Being in newspapering, a journalist, that's what you do. And I just started. How do you write a nonfiction book not using names? It just was foreign to me. Plus, there were other things. The language was a challenge. I learned it, but understanding it was really difficult, and I had to rely on family members to translate for me. And in the end, I lacked the ability, by not understanding it, I lacked the ability to ask those follow-up questions to ferret out details. And of course, I was busy with work, the obligations of work. So ultimately, I shelved the project. And so my boxes of research were in attics, basements, rental storage facilities over time when Wendy and I moved around. So 3 decades later, fast forward to 2015, and I got an email out of the blue from an author in Norway who co-authored. He and his colleague wrote a book in Norway about resistance activities in and around Bergen on the West Coast, which is where my book is set. And what happened is that when their book came out, there was a regional newspaper that did a story on it. And in this book, there were roughly 20 pages or so of mugshots that came from Gestapo files. And they were mugshots of resistance fighters, Norwegian resistance fighters who the Gestapo had either arrested or were very interested in. And so what happened is the newspaper story that occurred in a regional newspaper used a couple, 3 pages of these mugshots to accompany the article. And sure as the clouds cover the sky, my father-in-law, Wendy's dad, was there were mugshots of him, a front view, a side view. And some of these fighters, some of these mugshots were identified, some weren't. His was not. And so as luck would have it, or good fortune, whatever you want to call it, one of Wendy's cousins in Norway read the article, saw the mugshots, and identified his uncle, and contacted the newspaper who put him in touch with the author. And this cousin had helped me when I was in Norway and helped translate for me. And so he was well aware of my project, and he pointed this author in my direction. And so I got contacted. The author wondered wondered if I had information that could help him. They were planning to do an updated edition of the book. So I told him, I said, it's been a while since I've looked at my research. Give me time to go through it to see what I've got, and which I did and reported back. But I tell you this, Shannon, because what it did is it reinvigorated me. It rekindled my interest in going at this project again. By that time, in 2015, I was retired, so I could spend a little more time. And But this time I thought, I was a little more wizened, I think, on book writing and things. And I've sort of always kind of entertained writing a book. And so I thought of approaching it from the genre of historical fiction. So I could, write a compelling story, a good story, hopefully a page turner, but blend it with history. So I'm entertaining and educating at the same time. And so that's what I did. I first, it took quite a cumbersome project because I converted all my research, the transcripts of my interviews, all the, would you believe, note cards. We're not talking computers here, but note cards, which stacked roughly 2 feet high.
Wow.
And from all the books and things that I assembled, and I put them into the computer and organized them for retrieval. And so I probably started writing in earnest in 2000, late 2018, and had a first draft done by 2020, and took a whole year of editing. And Wendy is, like me, writing's been a predominant part of her career, and so she's one whale of an editor, but she's also a lawyer, and so I did what she told me. So that's how this book evolved, and we're very proud of it. It was a labor of love, just pure joy writing it. So.
Well, and it's an incredible book. I read it, and I actually went back through it today trying to refresh my memory because I read it around Christmas time. Took me a couple days to read. I love historical fiction, and World War II happens to be my favorite historical fiction. And I was thinking about it today. As I was rereading some of the places I marked and highlighted. Why was that? And I remember in 8th grade, just a bizarre story, but in 8th grade, I went to a very small private school in farm country, USA in Illinois, 13 kids in my class. That's it, 13 kids. And we did a history fair instead of a science fair one year. And it was World War II. And everybody did these little, I don't know, nobody focused on the ugly parts of World War II. It was, here's the war, map it out in Europe, this and that. They didn't get into the really nitty gritty of it. And for some reason, it really bothered me. I was already the odd child. I'm a high empath. Very emotional. And I got into the Jewish Holocaust in 8th grade. Probably read way more than any child my age should have been reading. And it just made this impact. And I put together this whole concentration camp and who was there and why they were there, that it was mostly obviously Jews, but it was other people that had been resistance fighters and this and that. And I used my Fisher-Price village. I don't think I ever looked at that village the same way again, but the bus and, trains, and had the whole setup. And I remember people coming in going, okay, this is a little weird. But ever since then, I wasn't a big reader when I was young, but I loved anything I could get my hands on in World War II. And I thought about that. We've had this resurgence in the last decade, really, of World War II books. And your book is very timely. Again, there was just a PBS special put out on the Norwegian king and all the royalty going to England. I think it's called Atlantic Crossing. And I watched that. And for some reason, when I first read your book, I didn't put the two together. And I'm like, oh, duh, I know about this. Because this is the first book I think I've read out of the hundreds I've read on World War II. Some nonfiction, most historical fiction, but very much so some nonfiction that was on Norway. And I found it fascinating. And the story was very compelling, very easy to read. I love that you put me in the story. You did a great job of putting me in the story. You didn't tell me the story. You showed it to me. You uncovered it, unraveled it. I'm wondering how much of your journalism came through in that, interviewing people and being able to take in journalism, you have to put people in the story. You have to make that emotional connection. I really feel like you did that in this book. Do you feel like your journalism, I know you covered it a little bit, really played into the way you handled this story?
Well, what a great question. And first of all, thank you for those thoughts. I hope that I don't shed a tear tonight, but what you said means so much to me. It just, it goes right to the heart. And and I can tell you this, I don't know if, I can't identify the influence of journalism in how I developed it, except to say, it's maybe it was my journalism influence, my training I kept a primary focus was to advance the story, move the reader through the story. One of the things I do not like, or I shouldn't say don't like, but I preferred not to do is I find some writers, they're so in love with the writing that they fall short of telling a compelling story or a story as well as they could. And my focus was storytelling and not beating around the bush, move the reader through the story. And I still wanted obviously description and things, but I wanted to advance that story. And in terms of and what you said about you being in the character, that's exactly what I wanted to carry out. And the way I viewed it is the way I like to describe it is that Björn, the main character, that I wanted to write it as if I was standing next to him, one step back, one step back. Maybe it's like, like a potentate or something where the, the assistant is slightly behind, but, still with him. And that's where I wanted to be. So I was observing him, watching him, what he saw, what he heard, what he sensed, and that's how I wanted to approach it. And there's maybe some journalism training in there.
Well, and I love the main character. I love the way you say it because I don't say it correctly. I always said Bjorn, but you said it right. But I love the way you portrayed him because it actually shows his human side more than just this character that's going to go and do the right thing. He hesitates sometimes and he thinks and he's caught up in the moment of, is this right or is this wrong? Is what I'm going to do next, how is that going to affect the people I love? How is this going to outcome? And we read so many of these stories, and I think it's so many of the historical fiction, they just go and do. But sometimes they have this hesitation. Yes, there's the adrenaline that kicks in, and you show that in here when his adrenaline kicks in. I thought you did a great job of getting in his mind and really thinking about what that would be like at that moment to make some of these heavy, heavy decisions he's making. And as a reader, I want to walk away thinking. And I always wonder on World War II and the resurgence of it. First off, it was probably the biggest event that changed modern history, right? I can't say it was the most catastrophic thing that's ever happened in history, but in modern history, it is. And it changed the map, changed all of our lives throughout generations. And they were known as the greatest generation for a reason. They just come out of this, actually the Depression was still on and they were struggling, trying to get the way out of it. And then this hits. And in the United States, we felt it, but we didn't feel it nearly what Europe felt this, obviously. And I think I read to know, what would I have done? How would I have reacted? And I always think in that split moment, their lives changed. There was rumors, and you cover this in this book, in Norway especially, they're not going to bother us. We're good. We are not going to be bothered. And even when an incident happens that says, oh no, you're in trouble, they're still thinking it's just a rumor. And I think we all lived that. we start hearing things. I mean, I kind of look and compare it to COVID, because that's one thing we can all relate to right now. We started hearing rumors and we couldn't understand. And then boom, like that, our lives are changed. The world shut down and people died. And it wasn't nearly as traumatic, like war-torn situation as in World War II. But it's that, how are you going to handle that moment when within an instant you blink and life is different? 9/11 is the other time that it happened, with the attacks on the towers, the Twin Towers. And I think that changed our lives, and we're still living with that. But at this moment, they really have no clear sign of how long this is going to be their lives and what they're going to do. And I love watching that, how people survived it, how they made their decisions, because not everybody chose to do the right thing. And so tell me a little bit about this. Some of this character is based on your father-in-law, and he obviously went through these things, and what that was like for him and what stayed with them, because you don't lose these scars after going through some hard things.
Shannon, some great observations, and I thank you, and a great question, because I think my father-in-law, and Bjorn, and I have to say, there's because the O in Bjorn has a line through it. It's a Norwegian character, and it's like and so, and I remember when I was in Norway, and we were in one of Wendy's aunt's house, Wendy's aunt and uncle, and I was in the living room, and I was, working on my Norwegian, and I trying to get the character, that sound correct. Oslau came barreling out of the kitchen, thinking that something has happened to me. So very familiar with Björn.
That's awesome.
But it's interesting. The war years really took its toll on the Norwegian people, and all of them felt it. And for that reason, so many didn't want to talk about it. In fact, it was interesting, and I made this observation that, in some ways, after the war, they were obsessed in talking about it themselves, but yet they didn't want to talk about it. So they were of two minds, and so I often wonder why my father-in-law told me when others were very reluctant to talk about it, and I think that he might have seen me as this kind of independent, the son-in-law is this independent person. He didn't talk about it with Wendy or Wendy's sister. And the reason he immigrated, and I do know this because it was in his father's journal, he left Norway and came to America to escape the past. And his view that if he stayed, the same surroundings would inhabit his mind. And what he went through was incredible. By the way, Bjorn is made up of about probably 2.5 people, real people based on, but it's largely on my father-in-law. And Wendy told me, she heard the screams in the night, his bad dreams, and I remember went on a fishing trip to Westport and took my father-in-law. It was a News Tribune sponsored, group of folks from the office. We were going out on a fishing boat, and I thought it'd be neat for him, so I took him. But the motel room we were renting, we shared a bed, and I had to get up and sleep on the floor because of the thrashing about. He just, I think that in some ways he was a wonderful, great man, just a great man. But he was tormented the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And so were, and the interesting thing is a lot of Norwegians at the time, they would tell snippets of experiences, but they really wouldn't talk about it. And so there was a lot that wasn't passed on, to those ensuing generations. And what I think that's done, Shannon, is it's created the curiosity of, World War II in Norway is a rich part, warts and all, of Norwegian history. And so I think there's a renewed interest, I think, in the last decade or so, 2 decades, maybe over even 3, that people want to learn about what happened. And you are seeing more books come out. Mm-hmm. But when I was researching, during my research, there really wasn't, there were lots of history books. There were plenty out there, but in terms of novels, it was quite limited. In fact, I think the only novel that I read in all of the 40 plus, probably between 40 and 50 books that I read, there was one novel, and that was John Steinbeck's The Moon is Down, the 1942 novel. And that's it. That really was it. But there are more, I think, coming out now. So.
And I wonder if that's somewhat because that generation we're losing them. They're gone. Most of them are gone. And now it's safe to tell their stories because you're right. So many of them didn't want their stories told and they didn't want to relive it, I think, is part of it. And it's the same reason there's not a lot of books right now on 9/11. Vietnam's barely coming out, right? And it's because they don't want to relive it. And it's almost like you have to wait until they're either almost gone or they're gone to tell these stories. And it's such a fascinating story and so much courage in these young people it took to fight for their country. We can read it and I get impatient sometimes and I want to know the end, and I can at least, maybe that's why I like World War II, because I know the end. The good guy wins, right? and that's it. They didn't know.
Yeah,
they didn't know how it was.
The interesting part is, and I remember it wasn't particularly easy for me. And I can remember some interviews, particularly those outside the family. And, within the family, there was one aunt who was involved. We came to find out later she was like a courier, messenger, delivering messages, distributing underground newspapers and things. And the Gestapo was on to her organization, and she had to flee into Sweden, across the border into Sweden, where she spent the rest of the war. And she would just outright refused she just wouldn't talk about the war. And there were others who were reluctant. I remember a transcript, a transcript, and had it translated. And again, it was difficult for me to understand. But I remember a question I asked, apparently, and the responder said, the Norwegian, the former resistance fighter, said, I can't speak of that. It'd be too dangerous. So still, and this was in the 1980s, still reluctant for whatever reason that it would incriminate somebody, and they just didn't want to talk. And I had to pull things out of them. And fortunately, I'd done a lot of research, and that helped me to ferret out things. But I'm going to go back to something observation you made. One of the greatest joys of this book that gives me the biggest sense of self-satisfaction is that, I could have been a loving son-in-law, and when stories were told, I could have said, boy, that's really interesting, and then gone on with my life. And the fact I had the presence of mind to think this was significant enough, and to take the good old cassette tape recorder, set it on the table, and start asking questions, and capture the stories before these courageous people passed on, and preserve them, and be able to tell them. It warms my heart.
And that is true, because you did have presence of mind. I think I told you once when we met briefly that I had a friend. He was a good friend that lived here in the Pacific Northwest. And one day in passing, he said, by the way, did you know my brother was shot point blank by the Nazis in Norway for carrying refugees on our boat? And he stood next to his brother as they shot him. And it was just that split second. And he went on, like, that was it. That was all he was going to tell me. And I look back and think, why didn't I ask for more? I would have loved to know more. And so that was wonderful that you had the presence of mind. Maybe that's why he did share it with you, as he knew you would. That journalist in you wouldn't stop until you had the answers. And I really appreciate it, because I just found this whole story fascinating. And I wanted to just kind of go through the history a little bit. In September of 1939, Germany invades Poland. And then it's April 9th. I'm looking at my notes slightly because I did write it down. I do have it in my head, but I'm afraid I'm going to mess it up. April 9th, 1940, Germany lands in Norway, and they come into the ports, and then they also parachute into airfields. And there was a resistance. The army did try to fight for several months, but within 2 months, the whole army fell apart, and then the royalty all escapes, along with the treasury, to England. And you kind of covered that a little bit. And I always wonder, and I don't know if your father-in-law went into that, the book didn't touch on a lot, how that felt to be abandoned by your king and your leader, or did people understand they had to go in order to fight? Because if Germany would have captured the king, it would have been all over, and probably would have crippled the people a little bit mentally. But did he ever mention that, how that felt?
He did not, or I don't recall him mentioning it, but I have heard in conversations with perhaps others. I think they were, of course, they were very loyal to the king. And I think, and everything, the research that I've done, there certainly were some that maybe seized the opportunity to be critical of the king, but it could be an agenda. I mean, they been favoring fascist regimes, and and communists seized the opportunity to strengthen their position by forming resistance organizations and things. But I think by and large, the ordinary Norwegians understood the crisis, and certainly I think they supported the king leaving and going into exile with the government. So I think that was understood, and of course the resistance, and rather passively, passive aggressive. I don't know that existed, but paper clips and lapels showed loyalty to the king. They would do the, let's see, God, is it, am I got the V, or, Vi will win, we will win. That was showing loyalty to the king. And so there were, they're shunning, German soldiers. And I mean, they showed their passive resistance, but I think there was a strong loyalty to the king.
That's incredible. I do know, like, I've heard other interviews that you've done and stuff where the Norwegians did labor strikes. They refused to teach. The teachers refused to teach. And then Germany kind of hit hard and set up martial law. The concentration camps started popping up. And then as more and more resistance. Now, your main character goes over to England after the army falls apart. He goes back to his farm. He was a farmer. And again, it's one day he's out tending the farm and his chickens and everything else. And the next day, life has fallen apart and his sister is trying desperately to get, I have to say my heart was palpitating a little bit when his sister called and said they just heard the news report that Norway was now at war with Germany. And his sister's in a big city and she's saying, I'm going to try to get there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is she going to make it? Like, I can't imagine what transportation was like at that time, trying to make it out of the city and how many would have been trying to come out. Was that a true story? Was that really his sister? And
actually, the sister was a fictional, that was a fictional character. And I don't know who I modeled it after, but so that part of it where she's leaving to and take over the farm was fictional, but his leaving, his leaving and going and fighting the Germans, mobilizing in the mountains. There's pieces of that are true, and it wasn't actually it wasn't my father-in-law, it was somebody else. So there's the combining the characters, but it's based on, it's based on what really happened. So, and much of that book, really most of what you read, Shannon, is really based on what really had happened. The one thing, there's a romance in it, and that's all it came out of my gourd because, I'm not going to be writing about, my father-in-law's prior romances or anything.
Yeah, he might not appreciate that.
So anyway, my editor, anyway.
And I love that part of it, that you do have that little bit of romance in there and how they intertwine in the resistance and difficult decisions that have to be made. And I have to say, the whole time I was reading, and he goes and hides. I'm not going to try to say his name now because you did that sound so many times. I'm not going to try to get it right. But he goes and hides in is it Hittite? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Hitta, Hytta. Yeah, it happened. Yeah.
And it's like, I'm thinking, how did the Nazis not know those were there? Because that would seem like a lot of people had them and they were remote. I got the idea they were very remote, but it was amazing how so many were able to hide in those, and the Nazis never knew they were there.
Now, they were all over the country, and the thing is, remember, Norwegians, they're outdoors people, and they love the sun, they love the mountains, they love the sea, and so many of them. It's almost like the lion's share of the population. They have cabins somewhere in the mountains, and mine was based, by the way, it's interesting, I'm gonna where the hideout was, way high in the mountains. One of Wendy's uncles had a piece of property way high above the tree line, and built a cabin from, would you believe, wood from a torn down German barracks.
Oh, wow.
So he used that wood and hauled it up there to I think a road goes part of the way up, and built a cabin up there. And I spent a couple of nights up there with a friend of mine and one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. It was peaceful. Just, you were up there. There was, of course, here it was August, and there was plenty of snow up there, and a lake. In fact, it's where the city of Bergen taps their water supply.
Oh, wow.
You've got these pristine lakes, and it was gorgeous. I felt, it almost spiritual, and so that was my setting.
And I love that. And you did such a great job painting that picture for me. I lived in Alaska for about 4 or 5 years, so I could I've never been to Norway, but I could kind of relate to it. I was picturing these places in Alaska I've been, and was putting my mind, I love reading because it paints a picture in your mind. And I was painting this picture. You did a great job of really putting that setting of Norway and describing the landscape and how it felt in different areas. And one story that just came to my mind that's in the book is the crossing over to England. And you painted a really clear picture of what that crossing was like. I don't know if that was your father-in-law or somebody else you interviewed's experience, but it was not an easy crossing, and people were very sick. And I have to say, maybe it's just me being a major empath, but I was like, oh, I think I'm going to get sick. And it wasn't too gruesome, but you did a great job of talking about how those waves were hitting and what was going on. And I just, you kind of think, okay, come on. They're already having such a hard time. Make it a peaceful crossing. And they were, leaving this war-torn area to go do something great. And you just think all should be well. And they had a horrible, horrible crossing. And I just love the way you painted that. You did a great job of telling that.
And I have to tell you, it was true.
Oh, it was true.
One of Wendy's uncles, in his case, he was a district sheriff, and what he was doing is he was forging a fuel ration, stamps, cards, documents, so that fishers could take it and take people across to the Shetland Islands, which is about a 200-mile, from Bergen. Bergen's pretty much the closest to the Shetland Islands, and so he was forging these documents so they could get more fuel and take people out of the country. And the Gestapo got onto him, and he had to flee. And so he went on that voyage, gale force, hurricane force, whatever, and he described, when you read about the water sloshing down below, going back and forth and waves, and that was accurate. Everybody's sick, it was accurate. The skipper talking about maybe turning back, that was accurate. So there was a lot of accuracy, and of course, the thing is, dialogue I kind of developed for storytelling purposes and trying to fill in the blanks, but that journey was accurate.
Wow. I mean, I'm trying to put myself in their minds at the time. They've just been through torment. They get on this boat thinking we're going to freedom, and then to go through this horrible experience and the fear of having to turn back. And I like when they get to Shetland Islands, the guy said, you were brave to cross in that. And I just found that fascinating. And then you make it clear that when he's coming back after he's trained, and he's been trained as a special operative to come back and fight for his country, it was peaceful. He had complete peace on the way back. And I love that contradiction in it, that he's getting ready now to go into a really scary situation. And his peace, it was like, let's test his courage. Can he make it through the storm? If he can make it through the storm, he can make it through the first parts of training. And life is like that, isn't it?
Oh, exactly. Well, Shannon, this, I'm just going to tell you, I'm so grateful to you, first of all, for all you do for Discover Books, which is what a phenomenal company and a great avenue for readers to obtain books. But what you're describing just means so much to me. obviously, I'm very proud of this book and very emotional about it. And I have to tell you, one of the maybe going off on a tangent, but what has just brought me incredible joy is when I hear the scope and the reach of the book has, gone across the country. There's been people in the UK, a few in Norway, some in Australia. There've just been, and people, but people across this country have been reaching out to me, contacting me, telling me how much they enjoy the book, but in addition, telling me these stories of, I had family members who were in Norway during the war and telling me these different snippets of information. And it just, the book has really reached people on an emotional level. And, I've had at least two that I can said, somebody told me, a little bit about, family member in Norway or a grandfather or grandmother. And I didn't quite understand. I knew things happened, but then I read your book and it was, it was eye-opening for them. In fact, if you'll indulge me,
Yeah.
just let's see, I think it was either Friday or Monday, where a reader, somebody in Wisconsin who read the book and said, thanked me for writing it, and said that he had a great uncle. He had a great uncle who was arrested, some sort of activities, and he was housed at a facility, a prison, or some near Akershus fortress in Oslo, and that great uncle's father would apparently had to have known where his son was being housed in the prison, and he'd walk by. The father would walk by on his way to work and whistle. He whistled while he was walking to work, and in hopes and that it was a signal to his son that if his son heard whistling, put your hand up at the window or the bars or something, and that would indicate to the father that his son was still alive, still survived. And he did that regularly. And just an incredible story of the limited communications, and it opens all kinds of questions. How did they coordinate that and everything? But still, that was a story that I heard just this week, within the last few days. And of course, I wrote back and said it's a riveting story. And Shannon, so if I live long enough for book number 3, I think I'd like to return to Norway and write another historical fiction. And I told him I may well want to use that story.
Yeah. I think you'll live long enough to write that. You said third book. So what's the second book?
The second book is it's close to home here in Gig Harbor. I'm creating a fictional community, Norwegian-based fishing fleet, and so it's a story based in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, around here, and it focuses on the fishing fleet. And I wanted a strong female character, and so she captains a fishing boat, and in the 1960s, and faces the challenge of male-dominated fishing fleet, where they're a little reluctant to have a a woman captain. So anyway, that's kind of it.
That sounds fascinating. Okay, I want to talk one last time about A Coat Dyed Black. First off, I love the title. I love the significance of the title. Can you just talk a little bit about it, where that title came from, without giving away too much of the book? But it comes into play, and there's such a deeper meaning there. And I think it was a deeper meaning for all the citizens of that time. So if you'd share a little bit about that.
I will do it. In fact, I'll do it in accurate terms because there really was, in reality, and not in a fictional sense, but there really was a coat dyed black that my father-in-law had, and I think it was his father's. His father did some military service and had this coat, and my father-in-law wore it, wore it around the farm. He liked it because it had many pockets, and so it was functional. Plus, it kept him warm. And so, but when the Nazis invaded, the last thing you want to have on last thing you want to wear is a military coat. So he put it in, washed out the color in lye, I think, and then dyed it black and continued to wear it. And it was with him throughout the war.
Wow. And I love that. It was like hidden in plain sight that he's wearing a military uniform in front of, everybody, and they didn't know it.
And when I originally, right from the genesis of this book, I had that in my head as the title. I never strayed from it, and it became the title. Again, I'm really proud because, in addition to the fact there was a coat, but it denotes, it kind of underscores the fact, resistance fighters working in the shadows and whatnot. So, yes. Kind of the darkness, and anyway.
There's so much significance of that, and I love that. I want to ask you one more thing, and I know you're a really humble author, and you might not like that I ask it, but I'm going to because I think it's significant for our listeners. But this book's actually, you self-published it completely on your own. You edited it on your own, and it has won award. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, very pleased, and thank you, Shannon. And what I did is I used there's a Seattle-based company a production company that specializes in taking books, self-published books, to print in a high quality. In fact, a lot of smaller publishers use them to produce the books, and so I had them do it. So it's a professional, really professional quality. Very proud of it, but. I'm just
the award. So tell me what it was.
Yes, book reviews, which is a large scale. They review books and about 10,000 books a year, and 4,000 roughly are independently published books, and so. They did a review. I submitted the book for them to do a review. They reviewed it. It was a very good review. And the first thing that happened, I noticed a star up in the corner, and Mr. Absent-minded, golly, what's that star doing there? Shoot. And you find out, and Wendy started looking into it, and that it's a very select number of books get a star. Probably 10% of the books, if that they review. So that was the first big thing. And then I got notified that Kirkus Reviews selected A Coat Dyed Black as among its best 100 indie books of 2022. And that's a big deal when you think of 4,000 books that they review, indie books that they review, the percentage. So we were just giddy about it, I mean, actually, I'm sorry, but yeah, we popped a champagne cork over that.
And I think so many people don't understand how hard it is to self-publish a book. It's hard to write a book, but that's the easier part. Getting it out there and getting it into the hands of the reader is actually the hardest, most difficult part. It's not even hard to publish. And I will say yours is well done. The cover, the paper, the font, and I'm going to tell you, I didn't find one grammar error. They kind of stand out to me sometimes, and I don't look for them, but sometimes they stand out to me, and I couldn't find one.
Thank you.
So
that's important, because I will say that Wendy and I gave her my 6th draft, and together we went through another, I think, about 14 or 15 runs through it.
wow.
And so that means a lot. In fact, I'll tell you a little snippet, if you'll permit me.
Yes, absolutely.
The Writer's Digest contest, didn't expect to win. I mean, the competition's pretty darn stiff, and I didn't. But I got the judges' comments. They sent me the comments and the categories and everything. Very complimentary, very complimentary. In fact, I almost made it through, you know, the round. And but it was one line that you'll appreciate after what you've just said, and that is under the category, you know, spelling, grammar, you know, that. And so here's what the judge said. Certainly, you know, some English teacher's favorite student, you know, I'm looking at myself thinking, what are you thinking, Bucko? You know, you really, and Wendy, you know, and Wendy has quite a grin on her face saying, hey, that's me.
Yes. That is awesome. I love that story. And I know from writing just blogs and our newsletters and stuff, the more you look at a piece, the more you overlook things.
Yeah.
Like I refuse to read it for a couple days after I've written something, because if I go back through, it's in my mind so much, I can't see the mistakes. I have to walk away. And I have several people edit, but things still get missed. So that is a huge compliment to Wendy, because it will stand out to me. And I don't always want it to stand out. It just does. Because my mom was a perfectionist.
It was really very important to us, you know, on a serious note, really important to be accurate and to make sure. And by the way, one of the last edits, boy, I'm telling, you know, this is through confession here, Shannon. What are you doing to me?
That's the story behind the story.
You know, we're close to, you know, there's close to 20 drafts, and right at the end, we're kind of near the end of our editing before turning it over to the professionals. And here and you probably remember, there's a fireplace mantle in chapter 1, and MANTLE. And so we catch that one, you know, MANTEL. So we caught that, and but that's kind of how it's easy to miss things, especially, you know, when you've read it so many times, your eyes sometimes flash by, you know, you almost know what it's going to say. And so you really have to be. But the good news is, after we turned it over to a really talented company, it did get a copy edit and a proofread. So it was very important to us, because, you know, we've all read books where there are mistakes, and easy to do. But if you don't have a good editor, it really harms the credibility of the book, you know, and the quality. So we're very happy. I will tell you this, you know, there are a few, you know, things in there. So, you know, but you can't find them. I think it's
They must be those Norwegian words that I don't know.
Well, if I had it to do over it, I may, be able to change. There are some Norwegian words where there's just little tweaks. For example, when I talk about hair, Mr. So-and-so, when they're in a dialogue, and I used HERRE, which is Mr. in Norwegian, except when you're saying Mr. So-and-so, it's HERR. So you'll see that in there. So I needed to drop the E, but I'll live with it.
I didn't know those things, so all those things passed by me, but that is fascinating. And that is, normally when I read a self-published, I really try to turn off that filter because I realize how hard it is for them to, when you're self-publishing, to get that same quality of editing that you do when you publish at a big publishing house. And I just thought this was really well done. Had I not known this was self-published, I wouldn't have known. Like, I knew it was. I had met you at an author event. I knew it was self-published, but I honestly don't think I would have recognized it as being self-published. It's very high quality. It's a very compelling story. You do move it along. That's a lot of history to cover. And you move it along quite quickly without making you feel like, wait, just what happened to that year? Where, it's all in there. And even you were nice enough to put a little epilogue in there to give us what happened afterwards. Is any of that true? Just out of curiosity.
Forgive me, that was all fictionalized. Yes, all fictionalized. My father-in-law did live in Seattle and whatnot, but and did some fishing in Alaska, but no, it was all fictionalized. I wanted to do that just to put a sort of closure on it, and I could have dropped it and, had the end be the end. And so, again, I'm very proud of it. I'm really, I'm eager to get going. I'm helping a friend edit a memoir, which is quite significant. Pacific Northwest tribal fishing rights around the Bolt decision, a landmark decision related to salmon fishing and whatnot. And I'm helping him edit his book and revise it and things. But I'm eager to get going again. So
well, we're looking forward to that next book, and we'll interview you again when you're all ready for that. But again, it's been so nice interviewing you tonight. We went a little over an hour, but that's not too bad considering we're both talkers. And I think we could have gone on for 3 more hours and been perfectly okay. The audience would have tuned out, but that's okay. And again, we love helping. I love my job at Discover Books because this was kind of my baby project, and they said, run with it. And I started meeting local authors that were self-published and got a clue of how hard it was for them. And Discover Books was always focused on used books and keeping books out of landfills. That's how we started. And we started out here in Pacific Northwest. And then a few years ago, we switched to new books. And at the same time, I just started to happen to run into all these authors, local authors, and hearing their stories. And I thought, wait, I can be part of this solution. And we are. We charge nothing for this. We help get them out in newsletters. We help by interviewing. We're starting a podcast soon. And just trying to get the word out because there are so many great stories out there that no one ever learns about because they're not in mainstream publishing world. And this is one of those that I more highly recommend, especially if you're into historical fiction and you're into World War II. It's a side of the war that I hadn't read about, and I suspect many others haven't. I don't think there's a lot of books out there on Norwegian and Norway and World War II. So thank you again, Jerry.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And what you're doing, it gives us an avenue to talk about our books. And, it's a huge benefit to readers. How did this come come to pass, and what is the backstory to it, and how did the story develop? And so thank you for creating this opportunity, and it's a very innovative way to connect readers with authors. So thank you.
You are so welcome.
Thank you for watching, and don't forget to buy this book and many others at discoverbooks.com, where we let the stories live on and we support self-published authors. Don't forget to like and subscribe.